Welcome to Smokey's training recap video. We're going to rewind back 2 months to when he first arrived, and what I want you to notice first of all is his body language. I'm going to toss some food into this pan, and you're going to see kind of a startled response. It's not real clear because I'm holding the camera in my hand, but his startle response was really high. He was really uncomfortable with me being close to him. So we just started the process with him on one side of the fence and me on the other. This is a really fantastic technique when you're trying to build confidence in a horse, because they don't have to worry about you encroaching on their space or increasing the pressure or whatever they're afraid of. They have like a concrete sense of security. So this is a technique I will use often with a fearful horse, either when I'm first getting them used to my presence or even later on in the training when we're adding maybe something new that they've never seen before that they're acting fearfully around, or even if we're kind of reconditioning something old that they've seen, in their past training life, but that they have a negative connotation around. So this is just a really useful technique. You'll see there he was a little hesitant to take food even out of the bowl with me standing right in front of him. So I just moved myself a couple steps away, and then immediately he felt confident enough to stick his head back down. That's just another piece of the relationship building, watching those signs and working on that personal space bubble. So here we're going to skip forward a little bit. I'm now in the pen with him, and we're working on eating out of my hand, me getting closer, and some hand targeting. I really like hand targeting for a couple of reasons with a horse like this. First of all, we're working on that association with our clicker training of behavior. You do a behavior, you get a reward. So he's starting to build that association with how training works. But also he's having to touch me, and he was not real confident with me initially. So we're building his confidence coming to me rather than me, coming to him and trying to touch him right away. So I find that super helpful. And then I just want to point out here, he's kind of hovering his nose close without touching. I'm just waiting. But then I think it's in this next repetition, he's going to wait a little long without touching. He's just hovering. So I'm just going to take my hand away when he kind of startled at whatever was in the distance, remove that, offer it again, and then we get a successful repetition. And then I also worked with him in the very beginning with just some follow me kind of activities. What I think is most noteworthy in this video starting out is how delayed he is in wanting to follow me. I'm kind of having to bribe him a little bit. And also when he takes the food from my hand, he makes this backwards weight shift pretty consistently most times. So that to me is just telling me he's trying really hard, but he is ready to get out of there at any moment. If I were to try to approach him or come at him, to grab or pet or anything like that, he's gonna leave. And he also, I think, had a bit of an association with being bribed with food to be caught, so he wasn't gonna just fall for that trick right away. So there's that. He even took a step back that time. So here we're really building the relationship too of the human is paying attention. She's not pushing me above my threshold. Maybe I can trust and let her come closer. So here we're introducing the halter for the first time, and that is his response. He sniffs it. He's like, I know what that thing is. No, thank you. So step one with that was literally just target the halter. So he had gotten pretty good with targeting my hand. Now there's a halter in my hand. Can we target that? And in the beginning, the answer was kind of. He was willing to look at it, but he wasn't quite ready to touch it, which is fine. I'm just going to present it. He's going to get closer, focus on it, and when I feel like I got as good as I was going to get, I click and reward. So there's a little bit of like art of timing that. You kind of feel it out with each individual horse, how long you can wait before you click. But here we'll do one more. He gets quite close. And we would repeat that, as many times as we needed. We'll flash forward to our next little session. I'm offering the halter in a different way this time. I have two hands presented, and the halter looks bigger, right? Because I'm holding it open. This was a little harder for him, and you can kind of see that he's turning his neck away. He's not as willing to engage with it, and that just tells me he's a little more uncomfortable with it being presented in this way, or with it kind of being, bigger in his face. I can't read his mind. I don't know exactly what his holdup is, but as we went forward, I felt like he had a really hard time with me having two hands out in the beginning, and you'll see as we go further with the training how I altered things to where I was using one hand in the beginning. But there he stepped forward towards it. I love that. That's a really great sign. Even if he didn't touch it, he's moving towards it and engaging a little bit more. And that's just what we're trying to foster here. I'm trying to turn dislike and negative associations, aversive history with the halter into loving the halter. And I think you saw there that last repetition, he did touch the halter and he bounced back away from it because he was startled by it. So that's just something to pay attention to as well. Okay, next day, we're doing double speed here. Now we're touching my hand with the halter in it pretty consistently. And we're just going to fly through some reps with that. And then we're going to try the other way because he can't be haltered if it's just hanging in my hand. And here you see again, it's a little bit harder for him. He's not as willing to touch. So we're going to wait for him to engage or get a little closer and reward that. There I dropped the halter because it was taking a minute. He stepped towards me and I rewarded that because that's also something I really wanted there. That was a great rep. And I'm sure you guys can see in the early stages there is a lot of waiting involved. And if I feel like I'm waiting too long and he's getting distracted or something is happening off in the distance, I'll just take the halter away because it is a bit of an aversive thing to him at this point. I just take it away, give him a second to pause, and then reset. And we're much more likely to have a successful repetition after taking it away. And there again, same thing. He touched it. He actually touched it, and it startled him to take a step or two back. So that's what we were working with in the beginning. And we're just trying to recondition that halter to make it something that he loves. He's happy when he sees it come out rather than being that nervous about it and distrustful. There, one more. He touched it, and he touched it good that time. And we got like 3 steps back. So that just solidifies to me how uncomfortable he was with it. It's like he thought it was going to reach out and grab him if he interacted with it. So here I took a step back because I could tell how uncomfortable he was just with the actual halter itself. So I wanted him to get comfortable with me touching his face with something touching his face, because that's what the halter is going to have to do. So I pulled out his lead rope and first taught hand target to forehead, so that he's used to my hand touching his forehead. So I'm not necessarily reaching for him. That's not the goal. I want him to kind of push into me a little bit. And he's still taking a step back with each feed sometimes. But here, I really want him kind of leaning into that touch. But what I'm going to do with the rope is kind of simulate a halter, because he didn't have the same kind of gut reaction to the rope where he was so concerned about it. So start here. Now I'm trying to hold my hand there and feed him at the same time, which obviously is a little tricky for him because he really wants to back away. And obviously just let him back away. We're just trying to build confidence here, not force anything. And I think you'll notice as we do successive repetitions, he goes from taking step back to leaning back. Take step back. It's not always a linear process, but over time that becomes, you know, being much more comfortable holding while I'm feeding. So here we're introducing the rope. He's way more willing to target it right off the bat, which is great. It's what I was hoping for, so that we can, you know, start haltering basically, quote unquote, with the rope. I'm going to hold it in one hand, and I just want him to do his little forehead target while the rope is in my hand. So at the beginning, you'll see I'm not actually making contact. He's kind of touching it with his nose, getting closer. We're rewarding successive approximations here, breaking it down into the tiniest of little steps. And in the back of my mind all this time, I'm kind of watching how he's reacting when I'm feeding him. He's still leaning backward. He's still backing up. That's just something that we want to watch, hopefully decrease over time. And I think you can even see in this video that it is. But here, he was targeting the rope. Now we're going to go back to the halter. And after doing the little routine with the rope, you can see he is more willing to get closer to the halter, and he is not like taking those big steps backwards when it does touch him. So that's just, I think, a really good example of how sometimes we need to think outside of the box a little bit with these guys that are concerned or have a learned negative history with something that we're trying to recondition. And then here, I'm kind of feeding him through the halter, get him used to that halter being in his face, kind of in his field of vision while he eats. And we just kind of ping pong back and forth between those things. There, he didn't touch it, so I just took it away. And I'm going to see if on his next repetition we can get an actual touch. There, and that one was much better. I kind of even came towards him a little bit with that one, and he was okay with it, which there's a big difference between him coming to the halter and me taking the halter to him. So I want to make sure we train both of those things to, you know, most accurately simulate what real life is going to be like for him. So here we've moved forward to he's consistently touching and targeting his face to the bridge of the halter, and I'm feeding while kind of maintaining that contact. So he's getting used to that halter staying on his face and not moving backwards away from it. And then we're going to move forward here to basically sticking his nose through the large opening. We're kind of bypassing the nose hole and I'm going to slide it over his ears. We're just going to break apart that piece of something goes over your ears. He's pretty protective of his ears. So you'll see here, I don't usually try to be sneaky, but I'm being a little bit sneaky here. I'm feeding him while simultaneously trying to slide something over his ear. So I'm kind of counter conditioning as I go. That process of your ear is going to be touched. It's okay. Just keep eating. And that worked pretty well for us here. He is more protective of this left ear for whatever reason. I mean, we have our hypotheses about ear twitching and what have you. But so now I've got it on him. And then we still have to take it back off, right? So that needs to be trained too. And he's wary of me coming at him with both hands. You can see his head's raising. He's getting a little nervous. I try to just slip it right off. And then this time I'm going to kind of switch gears and instead work on targeting his nose into the nose hole. So I'm breaking apart the something goes over your ears and something goes over your nose and training those two aspects separately because he has a hard time with both of them. So we're gonna switch from target your forehead to the brow band to now target your forehead to the brow band plus stick your nose into the hole. And then what I'm trying to do here is feed through the nose hole, basically. That gets over him, and then he holds his face in there while he gets his food reward. And that hold part is hard in the beginning. You see him lifting his head up. He's kind of worried. I would take it to that point, but if he's like starting to take steps backwards, that's when we might, go back a step. Now here, flash forward, this is the first day that we actually got the halter all the way on. We put the nose band and the slide it over your ears together 2 weeks into the training. So here I'm using that same technique of kind of like feed while I slide. And you can see once I get to his ears, he gets a little worried. He shakes his head. He kind of pulls away. And that little bit, again, that's kind of like the art part of this is determining how far we're going to push him. In an ideal world, I probably wouldn't push through that. But when we're in a training scenario on a deadline, I will. So if he's, those little twitches, but he stays with you, that's one thing. If he's moving away completely, we need to take it back a step and see what's missing. Buddy. So here, just demonstrating how I can walk up to him now in a larger area and he's going to stay with me. But then if I reach out to touch him, he's going to move away immediately. So that's just kind of where we were at that point. I switched gears a little bit and added to what we were working on towards the end of our first month. I wanted to make sure he's happy to stand to be groomed, happy to stand to have his feet picked, all of those kind of basic things, because a horse that doesn't like to be haltered, they oftentimes don't want to be caught because they don't like what happens after they're getting caught. So I really want to make sure what happens after he puts the halter on is positive experiences for him. So you can see how often I'm feeding at this point and how I'm breaking down the picking up of the foot into little steps. And you'll see here he's more comfortable with me on this left front than he is when I swap over to his right front. I think there you'll see she shifted weight. I just gave him his foot back. So here he's going to step backwards when I ask him for this foot. I'm just going to ask him back forward. Ask him back forward. Because step one of doing this is that he should stand still as I approach that foot. So we just had to take this all the way back to that step. And I'm just going to reward him for picking that foot up at all. even if it's not a functional pickup in the beginning. We're breaking it down and trying to build that confidence. A lot of times they get really distrustful of you holding their feet because they think they're not going to get it back. So I try to give it if they start to seem off balance or like they need it. So this is the same day, earlier in the day, I believe. Just showing where we're at with the haltering at this point. I'm using both hands now, which I think is a big difference. Originally, I was kind of sliding with one hand. And again, you'll see this left ear still a little harder. But now I'm able to use both hands to get an ear under or over. And we're able to do it in less of a broken down process. So I'm not feeding throughout the process as much as I had been. I'm getting it over one ear, feed, get it over the second ear, feed. And there he's telling me he's concerned about it. I just give him a second to pause, and then we try again. And then he's much more willing the second time around. And here I'm going to try to take it off while standing next to him instead of standing in front, just so that he has all those bases covered, because people might halter anyway. And then here, I just want to show the difference between how I was walking up to him and he didn't want to be touched in that last video. I think that was on November 25th. And then here, he's walking up to me and engaging, and I can touch him, and he's sticking with me, wanting to be there. To me, that's a really significant change. So now we're starting to work a little bit more on haltering while we're in a herd, because that is what real life is going to require. So I've got my herd. Good news is they're not paying attention to us, which is ideal. It gets really hard when everybody wants to be playing with you and you're trying to work with the horse who's scared of everybody. So here we're just kind of targeting the halter like we did in the beginning, only now there's other horses right near us. So you can see how this has kind of broken down the behavior a little bit. He's not as willing to stick his nose in there because he's not so sure about doing it in this new context. And that's totally normal. It's just something we have to work through, and it's why I really like to show you guys how I started the process from the beginning, so that if you get into a context where the behavior breaks down, you know the tools to retrain through it and bring it back, because subsequent, retrainings, if you want to call it that, often go much, much faster than the first time around. So here we've fast forwarded a little bit and moved around, and you can see still worried about that left ear. He's worried because Forrest is coming closer to him. Forrest is a little bit of a bully. He doesn't want to get pushed away while I'm also restraining him, so he's a little worried about that. But we're able to do it, and that's just later that day. Okay, here I'm just going to show how we've progressed our hoof handling. Totally at liberty. I feel like if they can do it at liberty, then you're going to be safe to do it, in other contexts. So here we're working on doing this while there's other horses nearby. I'm also not feeding him throughout this process, particularly because there's other horses nearby. I don't want them coming over and trying to get in on our game, but he's quite willing to stand there for that, which I think is, again, a really significant change I'm really happy about. Here, when I first asked for that left hind, he's a little funky about it, so I just gave it back, and then I asked again, and he was much more willing to hand it over. So if they're funky about it the first time, I really don't try to force it, because he's communicating with me there, and I think he really appreciates, I think all horses really appreciate knowing that that's listened to. So we're just gonna let him have it and ask again. Let him rebalance a little bit. Sometimes they really just are standing in a way that now trying to stand on 3 legs, their balance wasn't ready for it. So I like to give them that chance to reset. Okay, and this is most recent. Just gonna demonstrate kind of all the things we've been working on up until this point and where we are now that we're reaching the end of our time together. So we're gonna do grooming. And I want you to pay attention here. I reached his hind end, his least favorite area to be groomed, and he takes a step back. So what I did when he took a step back was just take my brush off of him and wait for a moment for him to, stop moving, and then I brushed again. And I don't know if you notice or if you can see from this video angle, before I started brushing him, I kind of let him touch his nose to the brush as a little bit of a signal to say, okay, I see what you're about to do and I'm good with it. Okay, here we're gonna do haltering with my halter because it's one that I can slip over his ears. I'm gonna show how he will lead with you even without the halter on. And then we'll put the halter on and do the same thing. So I'd like you to notice how he sticks his nose right into the little hole. And then we're doing 2 hands to slide ears through. He will sometimes let me just slide the halter right over his ears, but he's far more comfortable having them kind of tucked in one at a time. So that if that's something you feel strongly about, I think it's definitely something that you can continue to work on and he will ultimately be fine with. And then we'll just lead down and back. I'm just really, really quite pleased with how calm he is at this point with being handled. And you can just see that from his head position and his overall body language. It's really much less concerned. Okay, here I'm going to do it with your halter because it has to be put on differently. It's a little too small, so I was really struggling to actually buckle it, but I think that's actually something great to show that me fumbling around with it, he was still, okay with standing there for all of that and it flopping around and coming off. Wasn't causing him to shy away from it. So I'm like reaching all the way over his ears to try to pass that piece through. And he's quite willing to accept that, which I think is more than we would ask of a lot of guys. Okay, there I actually got it on. And then I'm going to do one other technique to put the halter on, kind of from standing in front of him and passing the piece over the top so it's easier to hold on to it to try to buckle it. Okay, and then saddle pad. This is gonna show you kind of introducing something that he's a little wary of and how quickly now he can kind of get past that. So we're just gonna target it first. And I think you can see as I present it, he's kind of giving that quick move away, but it's just with his neck. He's not actually moving away. So that to me says we're in an okay spot. but he's not 100% sure about this blue thing that I'm presenting him with. And I'm just looking for him to actually touch it and engage with it on his own time. You see there, I presented it in a different spot and he moved away. He wasn't quite so sure about that coming up on his side. So I'm just going to give him a couple reps to touch it again with his nose, because that was more comfortable for him. There I'm rewarding without actually touching him with it. And I think what you'll see the most probably is that head lifting as he gets a little more uncomfortable. So that's a sign I try to watch to kind of determine where he's at with confidence level. If he keeps his head nice and relaxed, then we move forward. If he's throwing his head up, especially if he's throwing his head up with any kind of speed, then we probably need to take a step back and make sure he's confident with what's happening. Because if we catch these little signs, then you don't ever escalate to the point where he's running away from you. Because basically when we get to the point that a horse is running away, they've tried everything else and haven't been listened to. So they've escalated to something that you have to listen to. If we catch it earlier, we can avoid all of that. And then the final piece of the puzzle that we have is haltering in a group with other horses. So we'll start with Penny, a horse he's a little more comfortable with, although she is very close to us, closer than like ideally you might want. And then we'll move on to Shamrock in the second clip, who makes Smokey just a little bit more nervous because he's a little bit pushier with him. But what I want to say about working in a herd is you want to set yourself up for success. So I like to practice with the horses all close together like this because that's kind of like the hardest version. But you want to make sure you're safe and your horses are safe and you're not putting yourself in a sketchy situation. So if you're trying to catch your horse and it's not going so well and they're in the herd, you want to manipulate the environment to make it easier. So can you separate the horses? Can you get the other horses distracted with a pile of hay and then call the horse you're trying to catch over? Like, what can we do to make it easier and safer? Because this is when people can sometimes get into a little bit of trouble. But Smokey, I think, is doing phenomenally with it. Yeah, that's where we're at.